and welcome to another episode of Alf Zoo. This is a webcast about ITSM in a modern IT world. And on that topic today, I have my very good friend Simon King with me. Welcome to the show, Simon.
Hey, Alf. How are you?
Good. One thing I wanted to cover with you is really how the world of ITSM and IT support is changing, and how the tools and how the behavior and the people that go with that will change too. And it's not so much what we are today and what we're going to be tomorrow, but rather how will this happen over a long period of time? What is more of a visionary view of this? So one thing we know for sure is that user expectation will change. We heard about consumerization of IT, so we're blue in our face. So this type of expectation changing, how will that impact businesses? How will that impact IT organizations?
So right before we start, I want to kind of set expectations, right? We know nothing.
Excellent.
We have no clue how this is going to evolve. What we know is what we do today. And we can have a guess about what's going to happen. But so I'll make some comments about what I think could happen in 3 to 5 years. But fundamentally, I think the next 1 to 2 years are going to be a big transition. Mm-hmm. Why do I say that, right? I mean, we've all got some kind of electronic device. I've got 2 or 3, an iPad, iPhone. Choose your OS. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. The capabilities available on those devices are really changing our daily lives, right? I mean, where before, 5 years ago, I didn't have kids. Now I have kids, and they're getting ready to go into school, and they've got schedules for, different, events that they have with their friends. Mm-hmm. That would have been impossible trying to coordinate that in the olden days with paper and a calendar, right? We used to have chalkboards in the kitchen and stuff. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't cut it today. And so, I think we're seeing the potential of what could be with, calendars for the kids' schedule, with to-do lists for shopping that we need to buy. And if my wife needs something, she just adds it to the list. And as I drive by Safeway, it pings me and tells me, hey, drive in there and pick up the shopping. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean for the enterprise? Well, I think it means a lot, because these devices are now being brought into the enterprise, and the kind of productivity and the communication that we have at home, we expect at work. Yeah. Well, here's the bad news. Our enterprise apps don't do that today. Very few of them.
Is that why is that? Why we always talk about it? Were they never built with any type of future vision around them, or was this just too far out that you never thought about incorporating it in the original legacy system?
So I think two things, right? So I think there are two real problems. One is that the traditional enterprise apps were never really designed with operations in mind. They were designed with install and configuration in mind, and then being used. So they're pretty expensive and time-consuming to upgrade in general. Sweeping statement, but in general, that's true. I've seen one estimate from Gartner that says it costs $1,000 per user per month to maintain, real enterprise apps, Oracle, SAP, etc. What that means is that, these systems are only upgraded every 2 or 3 years. It's cost prohibitive to upgrade them frequently. So did we have in mind 4 or 5 years ago, when those apps were built, what's possible today on the web? No, we didn't. We could see the very bleeding edge of it, but no one was ready to invest at an enterprise level. So that's one problem. The second, I think, is that the innovation that's occurring at the edge of the consumer web, where every organization, right, when you're selling stuff in a high street store, it's commodity, right? This pennies difference here and there on products. The products themselves are pretty similar. The price are pretty similar. The only way you can differentiate is by the customer engagement, the customer experience. Mm-hmm. So there's a ton of retail-based money, marketing money, going in to innovate in these apps. That's meaning that we're seeing a pace of change that we literally have no way to mimic in the enterprise today. Mm-hmm. So the latest generation of SaaS apps, okay, now they're starting to bring in, the enterprise, the B2B SaaS apps are starting to bring that forward, and they're innovating at a high rate, and they're in this weird position where, on the one hand, they don't have the richness of functionality that the 10, 15 years of enterprise apps have, but on the other hand, they have this new look and feel, communication, easy reporting, etc. And so I think we're going to see organizations really grapple with that. And I'll say one other thing, which is that I think one key shift we've seen in the consumer world that's going to come across into the enterprise world is where before, when we were building up, instead of building up a data center right at home, we build up our media center, TV, hi-fi, etc. And the adventurous ones amongst us would pick these best-of-breed pieces, and we would make do to make them work together.
Oh yes, spend way too many hours on that.
Right. So the coolest things there was where you could pick two best-of-breed pieces and make them work together. Projector with optical audio to high-end speakers. But now we've seen that there's a broader adoption of good enough. Right? Nobody would have predicted that the kind of MP3 standard, the low-res audio, would take off the way it did with Apple. And I think part of the rationale was the ease with which you could access that information. So I think we're also going to see a second shift, which is adoption of good enough at scale. And that will drive a big difference, I think, in how we evaluate the solutions. Right? Even today, I just got an email notification from an adventuresome marketing group internally that's building a calendar on the 37 Signals Basecamp toolset. Doesn't look like our normal enterprise tools, Outlook and SharePoint. Yeah. And yet it's going to be, I've used the tool before. I know it's going to be very simple and easy to use. So I think we're going to see some compromises that look like a functional compromise, where before we used to try and build that best-of-breed solution, but in fact we're going to go for usage and adoption at the expense of best-of-breed feature. We will make do, and we will be better off for it.
So beyond just who's first to market and so on, how do you think tools will improve over time? Because right now we start with process maps, which is built very much for assembly line, where the same person or similar people did the same thing over and over and over. That's not very modern, and that's not very much realistic right now. So how do you see tools improving? Is context, is other technologies coming into play there?
Sure. So I think there's also a lot going on in the organization itself. We talked a bit about the tools that they're using, but there's an awful lot going on in organizations. I think the last, whatever it is, 50, 100 years, where we've really gone after manufacturing, we've shifted from a manufacturing-based business environment to a consumption and information-based business environment, and that creates different foci, and goals or benefits when you do that. So before, in the manufacturing environment, work teams, highly structured, highly organized, top-down command and control. That was kind of state of the art. Where before you had one person doing one task, start to finish. Right? Imagine if you were asked to create the product, market the product, and then go sell the product. You, Alf. Right? How productive would you be, right? You would be run past by these teams where we'd organized, here's the development team, here's the marketing team, here's the sales team. That was state of the art. Now, as we get to, we started to see it with e-commerce and some of these new digital technologies that break down the barriers between organizations. Now you're starting to see kind of communities, and these are communities of practice. This could be supply chain, this could be partner channel, where now with digital technology, the communities can break down a little bit, be softer, much less hierarchical. Sometimes it's the external partner that takes the lead. Sometimes it's the partner team in the organization that takes the lead. It depends on the channel. But these are communities of practice. So as an example, BMC, we have a number of centers of excellence, which are a combo of, how do I sell, how do I implement, and how do I get value from the solution. So from a solution perspective in the enterprise, that's fairly state of the art. It's getting mass adoption these days, but that was a kind of a key shift. But I think there's a next wave that's lining up, and that next wave is truly uncoordinated, right? So it's, think of Facebook for the enterprise. So this is social networks. These are opportunistic in how they're organized. They are unstructured in the processes that they follow, and they will quickly form and see little pockets of opportunity, and they will take advantage of them. And they'll move forwards pretty quickly, piece at a time, to take advantage of those opportunities, and they'll evolve very, very quickly. And so if I think today, if I was going into sales today, I'd be looking at how I could build up my LinkedIn model and use LinkedIn to see who I knew at a new prospect as a way to best attack the prospect, rather than this kind of slow, methodical march that we used to follow. That's just one example. Mm-hmm. So I think you're going to see companies really struggle with this because, on the one hand, parts of IT, parts of finance, you've still got to have this highly structured work teams, goal-oriented processes, following compliance for Sarbanes-Oxley, for SEC, etc. You're going to see in areas that are going mainstream, these kind of communities of practice, those can still be supported with email and SharePoint. And then you're going to see these kind of social networks that look like they're flying wild. They're going to look like they're out of control, and they're going to move so fast that you can't stop them. It's going to be like the tigers out on the prairie running so fast and taking down game at will.
Yeah.
And the highly structured organization is going to be doing this forced march and making sure its supply chain can keep up. And it's going to look very weird for a while. But I think that's part of the evolution. That's why I say I have no clue where we're going to end up in 5 years, because I don't think we know what we don't know about how those mesh.
Well, just listening to that, although it sounds exciting, and I see a lot of benefit from it, as a compliance officer, I'm getting a heart attack listening to roaming wild animals on the brain. Well, what do you think about the behavior that we're seeing right now between consumer users, the employees, the woman in HR, the guy in supply chain, and IT? Tools are changing, behavior changing, processes are changing. Will we see some kind of coming together? Because we have to work closer with IT. I mean, we're in a super IT-intensive world, and it's going to be only more so. We're becoming Star Trek, whether we like it or not. How do we become friends? How do we get along?
Well, I think, always on these shows like this is the big question, right? Are you going to do, the Gangnam Style motor working or the Harlem Shuffle? I can't tell that. I don't know. It all depends on personal preference. But I will say this, that, I think that the ways that these groups organize themselves and work together is starting to really open up. We're seeing it ourselves, where we look at what's our relationship with the organization, what's our relationship with the company. Where before it's kind of, I have a contract and I come into work 9 to 5. I think we're going to really see some changes there around, personal preference, around work style, more freedom of how you work, with what tools you use. So it will really change, what the business is trying to do and how it's trying to do it, and that's going to change the role of IT. So in the past, where the role of IT was like, be given a direction, go off and do a 6 or 9 month project to implement a solution. Instead, they're going to end up looking like business consultants. What are we trying to do here in the business? Right? If we're not trying to do the Harlem Shuffle, maybe we're trying to go into a new region. Maybe we're trying to enter a new market, or target in a kind of vertical-oriented focus in an industry. And we'll say, okay, what are the things that will allow us to do that? Is it people that we know in the organization? So do we need to mine our LinkedIn data for people with vertical focus or regional skills? Do we want to look at our partner maps or whatever? And I think you'll see IT acting as business consultants, saying, what can we do with what we have? And then how can we leverage it quickly, try quickly, fail cheaply, right? So I think it's going to really change the nature of what IT is asked to do. The organizations that adapt and evolve, remember, change isn't compulsory, but survival only comes if you do.
Yeah.
And so IT, I think, will really be having to look in the mirror and saying, are we prepared to change and keep up? Because if we're not, we are going to, basically die out. And so it's adapt to survive. And that role will require a change to say, what does the business need? How can we best provide it, even though we might not be the ultimate provider? So they'll be selecting services externally, figuring out how they can integrate them, figuring out the security implications of data, right? I mean, it's still a concern, but I really see a big shift where the business needs to integrate with IT, understand the constraints of IT systems and security, and conversely, IT needs to integrate with the business so they can offer the best advice, the quickest options, The option is that we can try for 6 months. If it doesn't work, we can drop it and try something differently.
Well, thank you, Simon, for spending time here in the zoo. It was really exciting to hear about it. There's not only happiness in front of us, there's also challenges too. But one thing we know is that change is always there for us. Next week, Catherine Craig will join us in the zoo and talk about trends in the analyst world. Until then, take care, be safe.